Hey friends, you're watching BrainStormAcres. I'm Henry.
And I'm Irene.
And today we're going to be participating in a collaboration with Stephanie and Dudley from Big Sky at Night. And they did a really great video about answering a series of questions for homesteaders. So we thought we'd give it a shot. We chatted with them, and here it goes.
Right, this was not as easy as we thought it would be when they said, oh, sure, answer a few questions. And we went, I could write an encyclopedia. Explain what a desert climate is. It usually means hotter and drier than most places. A lot of times, way less water per year than your average green environment. But we had a hard time with the desert question.
A really hard time, because really there's multiple kinds of deserts. If you look at Arizona, let's just take Arizona as an example. If you get down to where some other of our YouTube friends, Jim and Jessica with Green Dream Project live, they live down near Tucson, well, south of Tucson. And their climate is a lot different than it is up here. We're at 5,280 feet. We have 4 seasons. You can barely tell it sometimes, but we have 4 seasons.
Other than that, there's also the amount of water. Cactus don't grow well here. They don't get enough water at the times of the year when they need it to do well most years. There's parts of Arizona where there's something you would call a desert. It's sand. It looks like the sand dunes from Dune, the movie. So what a desert is depends on which desert you're talking about. Some deserts, the amount of water varies dramatically. The temperatures can vary dramatically. So most people think hot and dry, but you can also freeze to death in a desert. Why did we choose the desert to homestead in?
Well, we really didn't choose the desert to homestead in. We've lived all over the United States. We've lived in Maine and Massachusetts. We've lived in...
I've lived in New York.
Long Island.
Yep.
Maryland, Virginia, South Carolina.
Right.
New Mexico, California, Texas. So we've lived in a lot of different climates and a lot of different places.
Yeah, I remember actually looking it up, and technically speaking, we had lived in every major climate zone in the United States.
So we really didn't choose to homestead in the desert. This place originally was not supposed to be a homestead. This was really intended to be our base of operations. Now, we had a place in California that we had to sell for reasons of losing a job. We had 53 acres on the top of a mountain with water, excellent access, very, very good soil. And we had an issue with an employer. I lost my job. We'd spent 3 years and a lot of money, a whole lot of money, getting building permits. So we had to sell it. And we then had some money, not a lot, but a little bit of money. And we said, well, we'll go ahead and start looking around the United States. Now, because we'd lived all over the place, we said there's some places we don't want to live.
Right. So we were looking a lot of different places as we drove across the United States, because we have to go to Pennsylvania every July, August timeframe for a big event that we do there for my business.
Now, we weren't looking at a really good time.
No.
It was... The real estate prices were still up in many parts of the country.
Right.
The reduction in values didn't happen until 4 or 5 years later.
Right, right. If we were looking 4 or 5 years after, we would have found a very different environment, and we would definitely not have bought here.
What this was originally going to be was our base of operations. We figured we'd be here for maybe 6 months out of the year. We didn't want to have too much snow. We didn't want to have a huge amount of rain. We wanted it to be relatively remote, but not so remote that we couldn't go to a university town. So we ended up choosing a place that has a large university an hour away, another university another hour away, and if we really wanted to go crazy and go to the big city, we could go 2.5 hours to a bunch of different schools.
Right, right.
So it wasn't so much that it was school, it was really all the things that go around a school that we were looking for.
The level of education you find in the general population, the level of cultural activities that you find, plays and music and museums, and that's what we did not want to cut ourselves off from.
So that's how we ended up here. Certainly this would not have been our ideal choice for a homestead. It is hard, really hard to homestead in this desert. Water being one of the primary issues.
Right, and that comes to the next question. What are the pros of homesteading in a desert climate?
Well, for me, the pro here is we have a lot of sun most of the time, although the weather patterns have been changing. So we're able to have a passive solar house. We don't need an awful lot of supplemental heat to keep it warm most of the time. So that's great. We have plenty of solar for our solar panels. That's nice.
Right, and most desert areas also have quite a bit of wind associated with them, so that plays in nicely to the wind generators.
We live in northern Arizona. We live in the high desert of northern Arizona. That's different from the rest of the state. We're about 50 miles west of Flagstaff and about 50 miles north of Prescott, Arizona. So we're in a nice part of the state in terms of the countryside and the natural wonders. That's all really nice.
Right, but it doesn't pay the grocery bill.
It is really pretty remote.
Yeah.
Irene says we have more elk per square mile than we do people. And that's not too much of an exaggeration.
Right, if you add the antelope in, we definitely have more critters than people. On to the next question. What are the cons of homesteading in a desert climate?
Oh, homesteading the desert is tough work. It's harder than you would think.
The biggest issue is water. Without a doubt, water. We have always been conservative in terms of water. We lived in New Mexico before. We were part of a water cooperative for our water there, and it was always our largest bill. So we learned how to brush our teeth without running the water. We learned to wet our hands, soap up, and turn off the water while you're washing your hands, things like that. So we had developed that skill as very young adults, married people in our early 20s. Pay attention to what you're doing and don't waste water. But here, the sheer difficulty of acquiring water. If you want a well in our area,
it's an $80,000 bill to drill a hole in the ground that may or may not have water when you get down to the bottom.
Say you don't want to drill a well, you're going to go with water collection. Okay, when does most of our water arrive? Most of our water is supposed to arrive in 1 month, July.
Right.
Sometimes splashing over into August. So that means you need to be able to collect all of the water that you need for the entire year right then. We are on water haul. We have,
7,500
gallons of storage up at the top of the hill that we fill with a professional water haul guy. water. And after water, dirt.
Yeah, one of the problems in this particular part of northern Arizona is that 50 or 60 years ago, maybe almost 70 years ago, the juniper trees and pinon pines were knocked down by well-intended ranchers. They were intending to improve the grazing for their cattle.
If you strip off the trees here, what you do is you lose the topsoil and you lose the best grazing, because the best grazing is actually under the edges of the trees for us.
So the next question is, what was the largest city that we've ever lived in?
We had to think about that for a while, because what the heck is a city? If you want to just go with a strict one-name city, London.
London, England.
London, England. We spent 6 weeks in London once.
Living.
We lived in Silicon Valley for years and years and years. And that's just like Phoenix Metro or a lot of the other metropolitan areas where you don't know what town you're in unless you see a sign that says welcome to wherever.
And the next question is, if we had a golden opportunity, would we go back to city life? What would you say, Irene?
Oh, definitely. Because a golden opportunity is not just making a little bit more than you are now. It's a golden opportunity. We have lived all over the United States. Not necessarily in places that we would have chosen to live, but it was because Henry had a job offer there that made sense at the time.
The next question is, what is or was your job?
What is or was my job? Well, prior to moving here, I was a professional writer for most of my life. I was also an archaeologist. I have a master's in archaeology, and I did work in the field and also on the university level. I worked most of my adult life in the computer industry and electronics industry as a technical writer. when we moved here, I had to find a steady source of income here, and I had already started my business as a jeweler. So for the last 15 years, I have specialized in historical reenactment, bits and bobs, basically. I do jewelry and accessories for historical reenactors.
My jobs, we've been working now for more than 45 years, so we have kind of an interesting series of backgrounds. I've been in the electronics industry most of the entire time, by a lot, and certainly the last 10 years before my car accident, I was an electronics industry executive.
One of the things we learned from that and all the moves we did is there's no such thing as a perfect place. Every place you lived, and that's one of the things that really came up with us this morning when we were chatting about this before we did the video. Every place we've ever lived has had good points and bad points. Every single one.
Some have had more good points than bad. Some
Exactly.
have had more bad points than good.
I guess we don't personally view any place as perfect. And in some ways that makes it easier because you can sit there and go, okay, yeah, this part of it's hard, but it's better than having to worry about, this other problem. How did you get into the homesteading lifestyle?
Well, when we look at what other people are doing for homesteading, we were both doing aspects of homesteading and didn't know it was homesteading.
Yeah, they didn't call it that back then. They called it living.
I grew up 2 blocks from Main Street of a moderate sized town in Maine. Town was about 25,000 people, so there's a reasonable population, but I was 2 blocks from Main Street. 2 blocks from all the shopping. But my parents had a very large house with a very large backyard, and they also owned the 5-acre wood lot right behind us. So we had a huge garden, and from as long as I can remember, I worked in the garden. We had chickens, and later on, after I left home, they had ducks, but we grew all of the food that we ate, all of the vegetable food that we ate all year round in that garden. And we heated our house with wood that we cut in that wood lot, split and hauled up. So we had that background. I had at least that background going back, since I was probably 3 or 4 years old.
My parents lived in a normal suburban house, but my grandparents had a wood coal stove combination with propane in the kitchen. I thought that was kind of normal. That you heated your, it was could be cold in the kitchen, so everybody sat in the kitchen and chatted until the house warmed up. Things like that. They always had a big garden. My parents had a decent garden. We were always interested in gardening. Even when we lived in suburbia, we always had gardens, and the kids thought I was very mean. They had to pick a quart of strawberries before they came into dinner when they were in elementary school. There was always something like that. I got into the Back to the Land movement in the 70s, read everything I could find. I learned to make yogurt and I already knew how to bake, but to bake bread and do all that kind of stuff. So sort of came to the relationship with all that sort of stuff. And your mom always did jellies and jams and all that sort of stuff at home too.
Irene came to the Back to Land movement, and I was busy living it. When I was in junior high school and high school, which was in the mid to late 60s, most of the family friends were very active in what then was going to become the organic movement. We had friends who grew organic Angus beef on a large farm that's now part of a state park. Mm-hmm. So all of those things, and I remember going to the very first Earth Day celebration in my hometown. So all of those things were part of my background to start with.
Right. So the whole idea, we never thought of it as homesteading. We just thought of it as, well, we always have a veggie garden. We try and eat healthy, and in retrospect, we did pretty darn good. It's not a sin to go eat a pizza, and we still have pizza. What is the biggest predator in your area?
People. No doubt about it.
Yep. And how do we handle that predator?
That's easy. We fence it. It's posted. We have a locked gate. And
a loaded firearm. Always. We have very little crime in our area because anyone from the area who might decide to do something stupid knows that everybody here has got firearms. Other than that, our largest predator here is mountain lion.
Mountain lions, bobcats, javelinas, and really the most dangerous, without a doubt, the most
Wild dogs.
dangerous is dog packs.
Yeah, dog
both,
packs.
Both wild dogs and, sad to say, domesticated dogs that their owners have let run loose.
Right. In terms of the other predators, we leave them alone. Bobcats are a blessing to us. I mean, you know, when they come in, we're like psyched because it means they're going to annihilate the rodent population.
What's next on our list?
When people think of the desert, they think of extreme heat. How do you manage that during the hot months?
Well, it's interesting. We bought this place 15 years ago. Yeah, it may have been 16 years ago now, but anyway, about 15 years ago. And we keep reasonably close track of what the weather does. Irene's been doing this for many years for the gardening that we do. She is incredibly organized in that regard. So when we first bought this place, we'd have a week or two in the summer when it would be upper 90s.
Yeah.
And we'd have a day or two of something over 100 degrees.
Right.
But it would only be a day or two, and a ceiling fan just did fine. All that was fine.
Yeah.
And then about 4 years ago or 5 years ago, the weather patterns started changing.
Right.
And two things happened. One is we have more humidity coming in now than we used to. And the second thing is it's hotter.
Yeah. It was, you know, it would spend days in a row last summer over 100 degrees. Now, it doesn't usually hit 110, but it will hit 103, 104. And the problem is it wasn't cooling down at night. One of the blessings about high altitudes, and a flaw if you don't like cold weather, is that the minute the sun goes down, you can feel about a 10-degree drop. A 10-degree drop. That sun, you could say like, and so then the temperature goes, and that's awesome because in the summertime, it means that as the afternoon wears on, the breeze comes up usually. You open every door and window you've got. You let the heat leave the building, and then you, in the morning, shut it back down before it gets hot outside, and you've got this little thermal storage for your coolness during the day.
Yeah, so we're completely off-grid, which means it's really important for us to manage our energy expenditures. A chief expenditure for many people, especially in the city, is heating and cooling. Well, our house is a passive solar house. We designed it that way on purpose.
Right, and it's super insulated.
Until the past couple of years, we've stayed very reasonably comfortable.
Right.
In this desert, we have a 30 to 40 degree temperature swing over a course of 24 hours. So say it was 95 degrees, as Irene was talking about. We could count on it being in the low 60s at night, maybe even the upper 50s. That was great because that meant that you could sleep easily, it was comfortable.
Right.
And then the next day you had a nice, comfortable house.
When you live in a dry environment, a fan lets your body do what it was designed to do. That is, evaporate sweat, and sweat drops your body temperature. And usually you can just run a fan, and that's enough. But when it's 100 degrees and it just never goes away,
And it's high humidity.
and the fan's not working anymore, and
5 years ago, I put in a mini split air conditioner. And the reason why I did was because we were mapping what was happening to our temperatures. And the thing that we noticed was that we were having a general increase in the daytime temperatures.
Right.
That's not such a big problem. What was the real big problem was we started having 3 days or 4 days in a row of over 100 degrees. And that wasn't so bad by itself. What was bad was we were only having a 10-degree drop.
At
So
night,
it'd be in the 90s at night, which was like when we used to stay down with our daughter in Phoenix. It was not fun.
we decided that the climate change that is occurring right now, whether you're in an area that is suddenly seeing 100-year floods every year, or whether, any of those things, you really need to look at and decide how you're going to deal with it in the future. Do we like running an AC? No, we don't.
What's else on the list?
Let's see. We are off grid completely.
Really off grid.
Yeah, it says, are you off grid completely or partially, and why?
and the why is real simple. It's 6.2 miles to the closest power line that we can connect to.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not going to run 6.2 miles of extension cords or permanent wiring.
In your climate, are you able to forage and survive off the land?
Not a chance.
Nope.
The actual short answer is, if it were a survival situation, we're certainly capable of surviving for a very extended period of time, not counting any of our stores of food in our pantry.
Right.
We could find things to eat. We could find things.
Would I want to? Oh, heck no.
There are parts of the high desert of northern Arizona where you could live.
Yes, and that's where the Native Americans lived. They lived in some of the deeper valleys that had reliable water sources, berries, fruits, nuts, the whole 9 yards. We have never been able to get our pinon trees here to produce good quality nuts. Never. What livestock animals do you think thrive best in the desert, and why?
You can grow a lot of livestock in this desert, assuming you have water and you have food to supplement what they're eating, because
there's no browse here. If I had to choose an animal to try and keep alive here pretty much on its own, I'd probably choose a goat, because they were naturally desert animals. And that's one thing people need to look at. Basically, you want animals that can survive with as little water as possible. And I would probably do chickens, and I might do rabbits.
Rabbits would survive here fine.
What natural disasters can you or have you dealt with living in your desert area? So we made a list of natural disasters because we didn't want to miss any. Fire, flood, hurricane, earthquake, and tornadoes.
You get local flooding here.
Flash flooding on a regular basis. Other times, when we get, which happens every couple of years, 4 inches of water in an hour. The little arroyo east of us here will go from bone dry to 35 feet wide and 3 feet deep in minutes. And it would take away a cow, a car, a kid, anything that was out there. An adult, it doesn't make any difference. We love to stand up on the hill and watch it. We are on a hill. Our house was built up here on purpose. We like the view, but also it's a safe place to be. Fire is a perennial problem in Arizona, and we have what they call a defensible perimeter.
Yeah, well, I spent time a long time ago.
When you were a youngin'.
Yeah, I was.
Yeah.
Fighting wildfires in New Mexico. People say, oh, well, it can't burn. There's not enough stuff to burn. But if you have watched any of the videos that I've done when we were flame weeding parts of our yard, you'll notice I wait until there's very little breeze, that there's at least some moisture on the ground.
And that the breeze that is there is blowing in the correct direction.
But it still burns really, really fast. It burns really hot, and it can set other things on fire really easily.
Yeah.
How about earthquakes?
Earthquakes, yes, we did an earthquake. We are a seismically active area, not as seismically active as California. Hurricanes.
We don't have hurricanes, but we do get
the remnants.
We get the moisture coming from hurricanes.
Yeah. Sometimes when they come into the Baja areas, usually when we get it. Once in a rare while, something from the Gulf will come up, but that means it has to go westerly, so that's kind of unusual. But usually what happens is you'll get something that comes into Baja, and it'll come up across Mexico, and then that's when we can get some real rain. So that goes into the flood aspect of it. Be aware of what your water does so that you're just not surprised by it. And pay attention. Tornadoes. Yes, we have...
It used to be people believed that there were no tornadoes that happened in Arizona.
Right.
They never happened.
Right.
Well, let's see. It was probably...
5 or 6 years ago now?
No, it's more than 10.
No, Belmont was not hit that long ago. Anyway, Belmont, Arizona, between us and Flagstaff, was hit by not one, but 2 tornadoes. Most of our tornadoes are not the giant E4 sort of things. They're usually E0, E1. We have a 120 mile an hour rated roof. on the
And we
house.
have hurricane ties on every single roof truss. What's the last question we have?
If you could choose anywhere to homestead, would you still choose the desert? Why or why not?
I wouldn't choose the desert.
Me neither.
Do I dislike the desert? No, I actually like a lot of aspects of where we live. What would I like to have in a homestead if it was a homestead where we weren't traveling for Irene's business, which is one of the big issues here, is I would love to be in parts of Northern Virginia if I could afford it.
Right.
I would love to be in other places in the country like that if I could afford it. I like to garden. I like to hunt. I like to fish. Probably the ideal location, if I could go back in time, that we've ever lived was both our hardest place, most fun place, and had the most potential. We lived in Marshall, Virginia. I leased 450 acres. There was a 2-bedroom house.
The kitchen was a 100-year-old cabin in those days, and that was a long time ago.
Yeah, that was almost 45 years ago.
With a little fireplace that we stuffed a wood stove into that we found out in the, I don't know why the wood stove was in the yard, but we put it back in the house and used it to heat the kitchen. We had a lake that we could fish in that was stocked.
Which we did.
And we fished there a lot because you could go down and fish for a couple of hours and totally enjoy yourself fishing and come back and have a monster fish fry. I miss fish. I miss fish a lot.
That would be kind of the ideal homestead location for me.
Right. My view is I homesteaded when I was 24.
And that was in Marshall.
That was in Marshall. I did everything from scratch. We had a goat. We had ducks. I had a little bitty kid. I would carry him on my back and go skid logs, small logs, obviously, and then cut them up and use it as firewood. I made yogurt from scratch. I made berries and into jellies and jams.
Sourdough bread,
the whole 9 yards. I did that gig. I don't necessarily, at the age of over 60, over 65 actually, I feel that I have to do that again. I do heat the studio with wood. If I could afford it, I would install the other propane tank and I would have a propane heater in there. Because I don't mind heating with wood, but I tell you, when you come down there in the morning, it's 30 degrees in there. It takes a while to heat that place up.
We chose this place because we wanted a place that we could buy outright, that we didn't want debt. We wanted to be able to build our home base over a large number of years and then move our stuff to the home base. Well, that got accelerated by years because of my loss of a job.
Right.
So we're here. We're doing okay. We're doing okay. We're not doing all the things that we'd like to be able to do. It's not as easy as we'd like it. We're in our late 60s. We'd like to not have to be doing some of the things, but we do them.
Yeah. Well, you don't get to choose what you do sometimes. Do we like where we live? In some ways, a lot.
I like it a whole lot. Well, one of the things we were really looking for is we wanted enough property that our noisy, smelly hobbies wouldn't annoy our neighbors.
Right. If I decide to fire up a cold forge, I don't want a neighbor getting pissed at me. If I decide I'm going to do some dyeing project, as in dyeing fabric, that's using some antique, smelly technique, I don't want them going, ew, that smells bad. I don't want to have to listen to their music. There's a lot of pros to it, but it is not easy. And it is, when some of the whiners that we see from other less challenging parts of the United States, I'm like, oh, put on your big girl panties and get on with it.
Suck it up.
Suck it up, Buttercup. It's really hard for us living out here. They're young, they're in their 20s or 30s, and they're whining about, oh, I'm so tired. I'm like, okay, try being 67 or 68 or something like that, and being told you got to go cut wood, because otherwise you're going to freeze to death. Yay!
Homestead living lifestyle in the northern Arizona is not cut out for sissies.
No sissies need apply.
It's not cut out for wussies. And if I were to tell you one most important thing, is when you bring a piece of equipment or a piece of property or some tool onto your property, you'd better be able to fix it. If you can't fix it, it's probably going to break, and you're not going to be able to find somebody who can fix it unless you put it into your truck and drive it a long distance to get it fixed.
Right.
So you need to be able to do a lot of different things. You'll notice me cooking in the kitchen, me repairing some things outside. I'll do some gardening. Irene will do gardening. You'll see her cooking. We can pretty much do what the other one does.
Right,
Now,
and that's probably one of the things that we would say is the most important attribute of a couple that's going to go homestead. You've got to be able to duplicate the other person's skills to some extent. The most common reason we see people out here leaving is because a spouse dies. And usually it's if a woman dies, the husband will stay more than 50% of the time. Because they're doing the heavy labor anyway. If a man dies, the wife is out of here. Because a lot of them cannot do the stuff. They don't know how to run the electrical. They couldn't start a generator if their life depended on it. Yeah, I could change the oil in the generator and start it. You know, I mean...
So, it's really... The real point here is that you have to really be capable of sustaining your own place yourselves.
Right.
It really came home to roost for me when I had my car accident, because I'm not able to work as hard as I used to. I haven't been able to work as long as I used to. A lot of things have changed. So Irene's had to pick up some more of the heavy lifting. Now, when we were building this place, we were working side by side 14, 16 hours a day, every day, hard day's work. Building a homestead is not easy.
Not at all.
Well, listen, thanks for watching this very long video. I want to thank Stephanie and Dudley from Big Sky at Night. They're another Arizona homestead family.
Right. They're northeast of us.
Well, thanks for watching.
Bye.
Bye.